Today we're going to talk about simple interest. There is a formula here you need to know, so it's going to be important that you make sure you memorize this formula. Make sure also that you are taking notes on this information. You can see I've started my notes. You might want to pause and then write your left-hand column and then go ahead and add to that as I add to it. But again, make sure you are taking your Cornell notes as you're getting this information. Remember too, if you watch it on Edmodo first, you still need to go to Educanon and look for this video on simple interest so that you can answer the questions on there as well. All right, so interest, first of all, we need a little definition here. Interest is the amount of money paid or earned for the use of money. For example, if you were to borrow money to buy a car, which is a normal reason why we would buy a car or have interest, is when you're buying money and you or borrowing money, excuse me, and you get a loan. Okay, so any kind of a loan that you get, whether it's for a car or for maybe buying a house, anything like that, you will usually pay interest on that loan to pay back the bank. So it's like that's the way they make their money. We then have the principal. The principal is the amount of money that is invested or borrowed. So it's literally what you're borrowing from the bank. The amount of money invested or borrowed. One way to think of it is if your car that you're buying was $35,000, that's your principal. That's what you're borrowing from the bank, is that $35,000. It can also be, sometimes you get interest on something. For example, a checking account or a savings account. So if I put in the bank, if I put $1,000 in the bank, then I might get the earnings back on that interest or interest on that money. So instead of $1,000, eventually it might wind up being like $1,500 or something like that, depending on what the interest was on that or the interest rate was on the money that I put in the bank. We also have the total amount. That would be your interest, whatever interest you earned. Oops. Plus the principal. Because again, whether you are borrowing money or you're investing the money, the principal is what you're either borrowing or investing. You're still getting interest on that money, and then that's your total amount. Now here we go. We have a formula, as I mentioned. We have a formula for simple interest, and it's a fairly simple formula. But it is something you need to memorize, and it's something you need to know all the time, because it will not be something you will see on a formula sheet or on a test. You'll need to make sure you remember how to do it. I is my interest. Interest is going to equal PRT. That means I'm going to literally multiply all of this stuff together. As I already mentioned, the I is my interest. That's what I'm usually trying to find in some way, shape, or form. My P, pretty straightforward. I think you can figure out what it's going to be. The P is going to stand for principal. R is going to stand for the rate. Remember that the rate, the interest rate, has to be in a decimal value. Okay, it has to be as a decimal value. And then T, this is going to be my time. And again, a very key thing here with the time, and this is probably the trickiest part, I think, of the whole thing, is you have to remember time is always referring to years. So make sure you're realizing that it's always years, because sometimes your interest might be on a part of a year. So it's very, very important to make sure that you remember that time is equal to years. Okay, let's do an example here. We have a simple interest example. We're going to borrow, I'm going to say we're going to borrow it. We're going to borrow $300 at 7.5% for 5 years. That means I have 5 years to pay this back. And so we want to figure out what is my interest going to be that I'm going to be paying back to the bank. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my formula. We already said I equals P R T. Remember that since all the letters are next to each other, it's multiplication all the way across. It's the P times the R times the T. So what is the P? Remember principal, or P is principal, and that's the money we're borrowing or that we're investing. I said we're going to borrow it. So that would be 300 here. I'm multiplying that by the rate. What is the rate? Remember, we have to write it as a decimal, so that's going to be, actually, I'm going to change this to a multiplication sign because otherwise we might get it mixed up. That's going to be decimal 0.075, because remember, we have to move that decimal 2 places over to the left, and that means I need an extra 0 in there. And the time is 5 years. Remember, time had to be in years, so that's good. I'm just going to multiply by 5 because that's how many years it even says. So that's what all of my I is going to equal. If I do all that math and I multiply it all out and use my calculator, I actually get this. I get 112.5. But we realize, actually I shouldn't have put the dollar sign there yet, because I'm giving you a big hint. So we know that this is money that we're talking about. Can I have just one number after the decimal? No. I need to have how many after the decimal? 2. So that means it's a dollar sign for my money because we're talking money. My interest is $112.50. Remember, because I needed that extra number right there, so I'm going to fill it in with a 0. Make sure you are putting your money, writing your money correctly. All right, my next one here, or let's say we're investing this one. I'm going to invest this money, $230 at 12% for 8 months. Again, I'm going to start with my formula. Always, always start with your formula. I equals P R T. So remember again what the P and the R and the T stand for. So P is going to be 230 times the rate is going to be 0.12 times the time. Well, I have a problem here because time is supposed to be in years, and this is written in, the MOS means months. So I have to think of it. It's 8 months out of how many months in a year? It's going to be 8 months out of 12 months because there's 12 months in a year. All right, I'm going to show you an easy way to go about doing this math so you don't have to be panicked about the fraction. Okay? What you're going to do is think of everything that you have here as having a 1 under it as your denominator, because we know we can put anything over 1 and it is still going to be that same number. So if I do that, we also know when we multiply, we just multiply straight across. The numerators, all the numerators multiply, and then all the denominators multiply. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to multiply 230 times 12 times 8. There's all my numerators. When I do that, I get an answer of 220.8. So I get 220.8. For right now, I'm going to go ahead and just leave that as the 0.8. We're okay with that. But remember, I haven't done anything with this 12. So now all of this is going to go over 12. And the reason why it's going over 12 is because if I look at this, I had 1 times 1 times 12 on the bottom. And that's my denominator there. So now all I have to do is divide. And when I do that division, my I can put that here too. My I becomes $18.40. Again, actually, I think on the calculator it becomes 18.4, and then you are adding the 0 for your to have two numbers after your decimal. So again, easy way to do it is just multiply your numerators, and then we can divide by the 12. You can almost do it all in the calculator at the same time. You may not even need to write down this step right here. You could just go ahead and multiply this, times and then divide it by the 12, and then you'll get that answer right there when you're done. Okay, let's look at the next one. This time, we're looking at a total amount example. Let me go back a second. The one we just did here, was to find out just doing the interest itself. But now that we have the interest, what we would need to do is add it back to the principal to find out how much money we actually had to pay back. It's kind of like when we were doing tax or markup. In a way, this is like a markup on the money. I borrowed $230, or I invested it, but I'm going to get back $18.40 more than, for what I did. So let's look at this one. Now we have total amount examples. Okay, so we have $660 at 5.25% for 2 years. For 2 years. So again, formula. Always, always, always start with a formula. This is going to get us ready for when we get into our geometry unit too. Lots of formulas that we work with. So I is equal to PRT. Always a formula. Now I can plug in all my I, my P, my R, my T, and do the math. Okay, again, I'm still finding I. P is 660 times the rate. What should my rate be? 0.0525. Remember, do not round here. Don't do any rounding. Your rounding is only when you get your final answer. Don't round any kind of rates or anything like that. And my time, 2 years, good. It's in years. That's what I want. So it's just going to be timesing by the 2. Once I type all that into the calculator, because all I need to do is use a calculator, type it all in, and 660 times the 0.0525 times 2, I get $69.30. But remember, that's my interest. So let's say I borrowed this money, the $660. I have to pay back $660 and this interest. That means I need to add it up. So I'm going to put my 660 right underneath. And I'm going to add it up. So I have 30 here, 9, 12, 7. So it's going to be paying back a total of $729.30. All right, let's take a look at this one here. Same idea as the last one. Again, formula first. Don't forget my formula. I almost didn't put it. Interest equals PRT. So interest is equal to principal, 385, times the rate, 0.126, times the time. Well, again, look at the time. What am I going to write there for the time? It should be 9/12. Again, that fraction, because it's not years, it's in months. So it's part of a year, which is 9 months out of 12 months. Now, again, I'm going to do all the math. So remember how I said to do this? I'm just going to multiply all my numerators. So I'm going to multiply this number, and this number. I'm going to go ahead and multiply all these together. When I get that answer, then I'm going to divide by 12. So tell me the answer you get here. You should have gotten 36.3825. Now remember, we do need to round because I only want 2 numbers after the decimal. So I look at that third number. I'm going to look at this number right here. This number doesn't mean anything. I don't need that. But the 2 is going to tell me to do what to the 8? Leave it alone or make it a 9? I'm going to leave it alone. Okay, so that means I have $36.38. But again, I'm adding it back to the principal. So I'm going to add my 385. And my answer then becomes 421.38. And there we go. Okay, so that's the basics about simple interest. Again, hopefully you watched this on Edmodo first. Make sure you took notes on the information. You need those Cornell notes for the class next time. And also then make sure you're watching it on Educanon to answer the questions that I embed. Hope you have a great evening. I'll see you next class.